This is Martin Giles, the Guildford Dragon News, and today I'm with Vinnie Conquest, one of the organisers of the march on Saturday that was protesting against the police crime sentencing and courts bill, and they were marching under the banner "Kill the Bill." Vinnie, welcome to the Guildford Dragon. You're a sixth former that goes to school locally in Guildford. Now,
Yeah.
and you were one of the organisers of the march on Saturday. What part of that bill do you object to?
So the bill, the movement, the Kill the Bill movement believes that the bill is a specific response to the Black Lives Matter protest last year and also the Extinction Rebellion protest in the last few years. We believe it's Priti Patel's way of sort of getting revenge on the people that have caused so much disruption, as well as furthering Britain into an authoritarian state. So the parts of the bill that we oppose is mainly the fact that it essentially criminalizes protest, because it puts the power for the Home Office and the police to decide what's deemed annoying, what's deemed unacceptable, which is extremely dangerous because of Priti Patel's views on Black Lives Matter and Extinction Rebellion, and all sorts of other protests that she may not agree with. It also puts people can go into jail for up to 10 years for damaging a statue, which is absurd because people go to jail for violent crimes for far less than that, and the statue's not a real person. It also specifically targets the Gypsy Roma traveller community, who are already a very marginalised group in our society, and the last thing they need is more police power to be used upon them.
Okay, but what about those that may agree with you in some of those points, and they're happy for you to protest peacefully, but they do object to the disruption of their going about their day-to-day business? And I'm thinking about the obstructions on the bridges during the Extinction Rebellion protests, for instance. What do you say to them?
Well, that's a good question. I understand their point. I do empathize with that, but I would say that protests only really work if they cause some kind of disruption. People, marginalized communities in our country today, only won their rights by causing disruption. The civil rights movement, the Stonewall riots in America, the poll tax riots in the late 1980s. People can complain about the disruption that protests bring, and I do understand that, but ultimately, if a protest wants to change something, it has to cause some kind of disruption. It has to send a message to the government. So if it went on the pavements and people were shouting sort of calm, sort of quite banal statements, that might be nice for the passerby, but that wouldn't send a message to the government and the people who needs to hear that to be forced to change something.
So the end justifies the means?
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
Okay, and your chanting at the march on Guildford on Saturday seemed to be aimed primarily at the police. Why was that?
So a lot of the people on the march come from marginalized communities. So people of color who've been directly affected by the police. I don't think the Kill the Bill movement thinks the police are causing this bill. I think they know that it's the government. They know it's Priti Patel. A lot of the chants as well were aimed at Priti Patel and Guildford's MP Angela Richardson. It wasn't just aimed at the police. It was a few chants were aimed at the police. But I think a lot of people are very angry at the police and view the police as people who enforce this system that has institutionalized racism and institutionalized sexism. I think there are a lot of women and people of color who lives have been directly affected in a negative way by the police, particularly young people. And I think they feel very angry about that. And I think our movement, our marches and our chants try to include everyone, particularly people who have become disenfranchised in our society because of police targeted racism, targeted sexism, and other forms of harassment from the police.
So do you think Surrey Police is institutionally racist?
I think Surrey Police is, I mean, people would say Surrey Police is, I don't think Surrey Police you can compare to necessarily the Met Police, but I know of people of colour who have been identified and harassed simply because of their race. I don't think it's just a problem in the Met Police or in America. I do think Surrey Police, they might not, I do think Surrey Police have a racism problem because so many police officers specifically target particularly young people because of their ethnicity. And I think that a lot of people, that's why a lot of people seem to be very, very disenfranchised by the police in Surrey, particularly young people, and they want to find a space to speak out about that.
One sign compared Home Secretary Priti Patel with Hitler and the Nazis. I mean, the Nazis were an extreme and violent party. And actually, someone with Priti Patel's ethnic background would have been a victim of the Nazi party, wouldn't she?
I think, I mean, I didn't bring that sign. I don't, none of my friends bought that sign. I can see why that would be seen as crude, to be honest. I would say that the way Priti Patel is furthering our country into an authoritarian state could be compared to fascism. So I get that, but I can see why I personally wouldn't put signs comparing Priti Patel to Hitler because with her ethnic background, you're right, she would have been targeted by the Nazis.
But as an organizer, do you think you have any responsibility for checking what's being said as part of your protest?
Well, I'm not the organizer. It is a decentralized effort. It's a lot of people coming together to do it, and it is really a group effort. I didn't even see that sign. I was near the front of the march. If I had, I probably would have said something. It was nothing to do with
Okay,
me.
but the march was shouting "F the police" at some stages. Don't you think that was very offensive, not only because of what you're saying to the police, but also because it was a public place where there could be young children around?
I think a lot of people, particularly people of color, feel very disenfranchised by the policing in Surrey, and I think a lot of them feel a lot of anger, as well as a lot of other young people. And I think saying "F the police," that can be seen as crude, and I can understand people's upset by that being in a public place. But I also do think that when people get to the stage where they feel they have to shout "F the police" in such a public space, what really needs to be done is major police reform to solve the institutional racism in the police, not telling protesters that they shouldn't chant that.
How many police forces in the world do you think would tolerate that? I mean, those police officers were actually escorting you and facilitating your right to protest. In my experience, I mean, I've been to quite a few countries. In my experience, not many police forces would have been that tolerant.
No, there are probably worse police forces than Britain's police forces, but I don't think that necessarily excuses them from their role that they play in enforcing institutional racism and sexism.
Okay. Now, finally, I know of at least one middle-aged woman who went to the march intending to join you, and she feels very strongly about the bill, but she left because of those chants against the police. So what do you, having heard that now, do you think that actually you should rethink what you do shout out at those chants at those marches?
I can understand people's complaints about that because of the crude language used. I do understand. I do empathize with that. And
it wasn't a complaint she made. It just made her feel so uncomfortable
right, yeah,
that she didn't want to identify with your march.
I think a lot of people, particularly in Guildford, particularly in Surrey, really have a problem where they can hear a language like "F the police." They can hear anti-police sentiment, and they don't want to be involved with that. But really what people should be trying to do is listening to the people of color speaking out against the racism they receive from the police, and because at the end of the protest, we had a lot of speakers with a megaphone come forward and speak about their experiences. A lot of them talking about the racism, sexism, and just oppression that they received from the police from Surrey police as well. And I do think that if people stay and actually listen and educate themselves, they can learn and they can understand and they can empathize with why people shout "F the police."
But surely the problem is, by shouting out that, you're turning people away from actually hearing that more serious message.
I do I don't disagree though. I would say that people should put aside their disagreements with one chant to hear what the rest of the protesters have to say, and then maybe they'd empathize with that chant in particular.
But you don't think that, in fact, the people chanting should actually tone it down so they don't put people off?
I don't think we lose a massive amount of numbers from chanting F the police. I think if we lose a few, that's a shame, but I do think it is up to people of Guildford and Surrey to educate themselves and listen to the other protesters. I see your point about the fact that the speeches happened at the end and the chants were happening before that, so it turns off people before the speeches. But ultimately, the march wants to make a difference. It wants publicity. It wants to directly um, prove itself as something that Angela Richardson, our Guildford MP, has to take a notice of. And chanting F the police does actually get that publicity. It does actually make us seem like something more credible than holding a banner and just chanting kill the bill. I would say as well, with the F the police chants, that was very small and there weren't that many. It was a few times it was chanted in quite a long march, and it was majority chanting kill the bill, majority chanting taunts towards Boris Johnson, Priti Patel and Angela Richardson. The anti-police chants were really a very small part of it that I think is probably being a bit overblown.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your time, Vinnie, and presenting your point of view.
Thank you.